Ready?
You're listening to the FYI podcast where we talk about all things faith, life, adulting, relationships, finances, your life as a young adult in following Jesus and what it means to be a Christ follower in 2023 as a
Hmm.
young adult. This and every episode, we unpack a question that you have that you're actually asking. And I'm Josiah Keneally.
And I'm Micah Keneally, and we just want to say we hope that you are ending your week strong and starting your weekend even stronger. So we have new episodes that air every single Friday. So thank you for sharing, rating,
Yes.
reviewing,
So grateful.
subscribing, and ultimately submitting the questions that you are wrestling with, because there's adulting, and then you realize that there's extreme adulting on some levels, right? And we just want to not only celebrate you and what God is doing, but we also want to celebrate what he's doing through the podcast. Because Josiah, what is happening today or this month?
FYI is turning one.
Woo!
Say
One
what?
years old.
It's incredible. So this is episode number 52, huge accomplishment, and we would not be on this journey without you as
Mm-hmm.
the listener, journeying together with us, asking great questions, sharing this content with some friends who maybe have the same questions or need encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And we love you guys. We love doing this together. It's been an exciting journey. Can you believe it's already been a year?
Yes and no. I mean, it's been a wild
Wow.
journey, but we just want to say thank you so much, because not only have we turned one, but about a month and a half ago, by the end of the 2022, we received an email saying that this podcast is in the top 5% of the world through Spotify
Globally.
and reaching over 60
It's
countries.
incredible.
So there's amazing people tuning in, and I pray that you are encouraged. I pray that you're inspired. And we just want to say thank you so much for tuning in and just letting us be a part of your, hopefully your week, and letting God be a part of your everyday. So we have an amazing question though today, Josiah. And what in the world is this question?
This question is on relationships. It's February as we launched this episode talking about relationships and singleness, dating, sex, marriage, God's plan
Mm-hmm.
for all of it. And this question is specifically geared towards relationships
Mm-hmm.
that are romantic and how do I communicate in a relationship?
Cool. That is a great question.
I think a great place to start is Proverbs 18:21, verse of the day, talking about the
Mm,
tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And we've found
mm,
this to be true whether we were in every relationship, honestly.
yeah.
One of my goals in 2023 is to become a better communicator in listening, in podcasting, in our marriage, in preaching the gospel and proclaiming it, but just to become a better communicator.
Hmm.
And we've found it that people that you're closest to have the most potential to encourage you and bless you and bring you joy.
Hmm.
And also, we've all experienced it too, right? Words that hurt or sting.
Hmm.
And the relationships of people that we let close to us also have the potential to bring discouragement
Yeah.
or hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to shed some light on this conversation today to know that communication is key.
It's
Many
huge.
young adults say, like, hey, like, what do I need to learn about marriage before I get there? Become a good communicator in your singleness, meaning you have the ability to identify your feeling, your emotion, and articulate it in a way that is loving, it is authentic, it is real, and it is transparent. I mean, those are all things that I think we can all appreciate. Even if we're a bad communicator, I think we can all appreciate those things, and the ability just to recognize, like, wow, if I can be a good communicator in my singleness, I will just become a better communicator in marriage.
So good.
Because when you get married or you're in a relationship, you will realize that the words you say carry weight, and they carry merit, and they can either bring somebody up or tear somebody down. And we don't use words to destroy people. We want to use words to encourage people.
And I love Ephesians 4:29. It talks about let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only
Mm,
what is good to build up, to
mm-hmm,
edify, to encourage those who listen. It's also not only our words, but Albert Mirabien, a researcher of body language, who
mm,
first broke down the components of a face-to-face conversation. His estimation and research found that verbal communication was a small part, but nonverbal was 55%.
mm-hmm, I believe it.
38% vocal and 7% words only.
Wow.
Isn't it crazy how your
Hmm.
body tells your emotion? It's hard, and even with text messages or emails, sometimes it's hard to, when that nonverbal element is
Hmm.
missing. It's like, well, I read the email, but do they mean this, or this? Were they angry, or does an emoji
Excited.
help? Does a GIF, does that carry the just? Like, communication is big, and it's
Hmm.
difficult to exaggerate the power that communication
Yeah.
has, the weight that our words carry.
Hmm.
And it's in the top 5 most important values for couples. If
Wow.
you remember the hand that we talked about
Yeah.
in a previous episode, like, we had talked about the middle finger, not saying that flip people off, but the middle finger can represent in the top 5 areas of things to look for in
Hmm.
a future spouse. Communication is in
Right.
that, and even after you get
Hmm.
married. And here's a fun example: money,
Oh yeah.
finances, right? Like, the number one thing that couples need is the ability to communicate, but also money is the number one thing that people disagree on, or it brings the
Hmm.
most tension in marriage.
Hmm.
If they study divorce rates, the number one fights that married couples have is about money. Well, communication, whether it's about money or your feelings or your calendar, the communication or lack thereof is critical.
Yeah, I think some just practical things we're going to unpack. We have 4 right here, and we're just going to share some things that we've experienced. Not that these need to be the end all be all, but just keeping in mind when you're single or married and you're understanding the ability to communicate, I would say begin to ask better questions. Don't ask closed end questions, ask open ended questions. So, even like, what was your favorite part of the day? Not, did you have a good day? That's a yes or no.
Exactly. So yes or no, that's a closed.
Closed. Yeah.
And if you add what to it, or how was your day,
Hmm.
that opens it up.
Or, yeah, what was the favorite part of your day? And just having those conversations around the dinner table or on a date night, whatever that is, it looks like. And to realize, why do we ask questions to begin with? Because none of us are mind readers.
It's so good.
Okay, so if you know anything about me and Josiah yet, if the last 52 episodes haven't told you how we communicate or how we function or a little bit about our quirks or whatever, is that I'm a very upfront communicator. I'm just very like, this is how I feel, this is why I feel it, and this is how we can resolve it.
You verbally process.
Yeah, so I'm definitely the verbal processor. And I remember just dating Josiah and just even early on in our marriage, is like, you need to tell me what you want, because I'm not a mind reader. Are you upset? Are you happy? Like, I can't ask you a zillion questions to get to what you could share in one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we learn how to communicate better and recognize that we are not mind readers, because
Yeah.
if Josiah has the assumption or just thinks that I know what he wants, needs, desires, or whatever, he's putting an expectation on me or vice versa. But in this situation, I'll say, I expect him to communicate. His expectation could be for me to fill in the blank. And when we set those expectations for others, and then we look at where they're functioning, there's this gap, right? And this gap
Mm-hmm.
I call it the gap of resentment.
Sure.
It's a frustration it can cause resentment and all these different things. And it can be from, what do you want for supper? Do we have anything planned for our anniversary? Where would you want to go? What are your dreams and
Yeah.
aspirations? Yeah, who are our friends? How do we spend our time? Like, when that gap is not close, which we want expectations
To meet reality.
and reality, when they do collide, this is good communication and a healthier marriage. But when that gap gets bigger, there's resentment, there's frustration, there's shutting down. I'm the external verbal communicator, which means, Josiah, what are you?
I'm very extroverted and I love people, but I process a little bit more internally. My
Mhm.
closest friends would say that I'm a person of few words, which you may or may not agree based on how much I've shared on this podcast. But it doesn't mean I can't talk or I don't have thoughts or feelings or opinions, but I really measure my words. And even an episode like this, Micah could go off the cuff a little bit more and talk about communicating in a relationship. And I'm probably going to bring the 4 points, because if we just have a microphone, I might have an answer, but it helps me to prepare and think about what I'm going to say. I've heard it said like this: some people think to talk, and that's me. And some people talk to think, and that's a little bit more of Micah.
That may be true.
And the next idea when it comes to practical tips, we had talked about nobody's a mind reader. Some people process internally and externally. I think this third one is agreeing on a time to communicate.
Yeah, especially if you're married, right?
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
having big
And
convos.
you might even be dating or with your friends, but especially in the marriage piece or future marriage, if that's something you desire, this is something to think about. Like Carrie Newhoff asked us one time, he said, like, when are you at your best? And Mike is like, well, I'm a morning person. So right away in the morning, best energy, most creative, most productive.
Yep.
And I'm like late at night, you know, and so we couldn't be more opposite in that regard.
Yeah.
And so when we first got married, we had never lived together. So we're learning how to live together and we were renting an apartment. And I'll never forget, Micah, you were like, don't talk to me after 10 p.m. And I took it so literally, like Amelia Bedelia. And you were referencing, like, hey, if we need to research where to repair our car, you might have 20 internet browsers open and you might have researched that late at night.
Right.
You might want to have that conversation late at night, but that's best. Maybe let's compromise in the afternoon or in the morning sometime once you've woken up, because after 10 p.m., you just felt like maybe you're more groggy. Whereas like 6 a.m., I'm pretty groggy. And so we couldn't be more polar opposite, but it was so hilarious. One day, I remember you had asked me like, hey, how come you never talk to me at night?
Like, what's your problem? Or why are you mad? Like, what is your deal?
And I was like, you said the thing about 10 p.m. and it's like 10:08. So
and 10 p.m. for me, I'll just speak into this because 10 p.m. for me is like when my brain's shutting down. I know I want to be in my pajamas. I'm winding down for the night. Might want to be in bed by 9:30. It kind of depends on the day, you know? So after 10 p.m., like I didn't want to make big decisions early on in our marriage, or maybe even now of like, where are we going to go on a vacation? Should we buy plane tickets now? We need a refrigerator. Should we buy one tonight? Oh, we have to do X, Y, and Z. Like,
or what I'm notorious for. What do you think about this? I got this dream. I got this idea. I got this. The creative juices are flowing. Let's talk.
Yeah. So he wants to talk from like 10 to 1. And by that time, I become the less filtered version of Micah. And that's when I can say things that are more direct, probably than normal, a little more aggressive, or may come across as I don't care. But in reality, I don't want to come across as those things. I do want to have a clear mind, a fresh ability to discern whether or not we should do something, or maybe the approach of how we should do it. And it's not that I don't care. So when I said 10 p.m., it was more or less like, even if we have to work on something in our marriage, let's not open up a box of or a can of worms, or open up a conversation that's going to not be done by the time we're ready for bed.
Yep.
So when he literally thought that, I was like, what is this guy's problem? Like, who in the world did I marry? Like, are you kidding me? So then when he was like, well, you told me not to talk to you past 10, I'm like,
and I thought it was the weirdest request, but I'm like, hey, you asked it. Here we go.
So we just had to come to an alignment of just like, okay, this is what I meant. This is how you interpret it, but this is where we're going to land. Like, you can still talk to me. It's just more or less, let's not make life decisions when it comes to our relationship with each other, with others, finances, and that kind of stuff. So,
and here's the fourth one. We believe what Proverbs says when it talks about there's life and death in the power of the tongue. And what we've discovered as a principle is that if you ask a question, you get an answer. If you make an accusation, at best, you get an apology, but usually you get a defense wall. And in communication, this is true in all of our relationships.
Yeah.
And we couldn't have found it to be more true in marriage, that if Micah's bothered by where I leave something out or shoes, she could say, why do you put this here? Tell me about that. Versus, you know, one of us is going to be crushed if she's like, stop putting your shoes here, or you're a slob, you're a mess. Like, and you can just see it with a silly example of shoes, but it could be dishes. It could be, for me, sometimes it's hard enough to track where things are that I put, let alone where other people that I live with, namely Micah and the girls, where one of them might have put something. And so I could be frustrated and say, where did you put this? Which is semi-question versus accusation versus, could you help me find this? Or have you seen?
a daily occurrence in our home, especially with two littles.
AirPods, phone,
Oh,
keys, wallet.
it's two littles too, when they see anything. Remotes, well, that's just about 10 remotes in the house for one television, I swear. But yeah, so communication is key. And one thing that we learned in marriage mentoring, Josiah, we gotta end on this, is to, when we communicate with each other, is to never use the word never or always, actually.
Yep.
So when you say you never do the dishes,
Or
you
you
are
always.
never on time, or you're always leaving your stuff around, or whatever it is, we try to avoid those two questions because it can be
Accusative.
it can be very hurtful. It can feel like one's getting steamrolled over, or one is not, I don't know,
Measuring up.
participating or
Yeah.
are measuring up to the expectations that we have placed on that other person. And that is not always fair. So when you look at the way that we communicate, we want to do it through the lens of love, appreciation, and not guilt trip each other, and not tiptoe around the issue, but directly ask, like, if one of us comes to each other with a problem or what we view as a potential issue or problem, we need to bring the solution. And I think when we do that, it's like, if we're going to use the shoes, for example, and they say, Josiah, why do you always leave 10 pairs of shoes by the door? Oh, that's how I grew up. This is how our house was structured, yada, yada. Oh, that helps me. Okay, what if we utilize this closet and have X, Y, and Z set up? So I brought forth an annoyance of mine or a concern of mine, and maybe petty and silly, just use that as an example, but I brought the solution, and then we agreed on it, and then we utilized whatever that is.
Yep.
So just realizing, like, communication it's not one person winning. It's not one person only being heard. It's about coming to agreement, asking good questions. And this is more probably the problem solving resolution side of things that we're kind of ending on, but communication is key. And if you can't communicate in singleness, dating, or engagement, marriage is going to be like pulling teeth for one of you in that process. So
the most helpful thing I learned in growing to be a better communicator thus far was in grad school. Took a class where we talked about active listening. And in active listening, it's like this. Micah, what I heard you say about the shoes is this. Did I catch that right? It's even tracking by saying, wow, or nodding your head, the nonverbals of communication, like being an active and attentive listener versus a digitally distracted individual.
Right.
And that's the temptation that all of us have. Or it's so helpful when you validate emotions. And that's what active listening allows us to do, is feel heard, feel seen, feel known, feel loved. And the invitation for all of us is a promise that James, the half-brother of Jesus, says in chapter 4, verse 8 of his book. He says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And that's the invitation for all of us, is that whether you're starting your relationship with God or wanting to draw closer, take that next step closer to Jesus. Today, you're listening to the FYI podcast.